York Times manipulated you into hating Justin Baldoni and defending Blake Lively. You're watching the Little Miss Jacobs show. So by now, you guys kind of know what happened. Some of you guys are Team Blake, some of you are Team Justin. But the real villain in this story is the New York Times. And I know because they attacked me before too in 2020. And I know the way that their games are played. And I want you guys to never get duped by the New York Times ever again. Okay. I'm about to teach you guys a master class. The New York Times did a hit piece on Justin Baldoni, and that was actually its own masterclass in media gaslighting. And if you blinked, you missed every single lie. Lucky for you, I didn't. I called BS the second the trash dropped. Christmas Eve, I don't even know who Justin Baldoni was. Didn't even have anything against Blake Lively. Honestly, I heard she did like a Mean Girl interview, and I thought to myself, well, everybody's allowed to have a bad day, right? Well, lucky for you, we're going to break this down. I went viral exposing it December 26th, I think it was, on X and on Threads, because I posted on both, because I saw people absolutely crucifying Baldoni. Even people that today are like big time Team Baldoni, they were like being cautious, because I get it. Like, you don't want to be on the wrong side of history. How did I know that there was more to the story? I mean, I just read the article just like you guys, right? Well, it's because, newsflash, I survived the New York Times smear playbook before, and now I'm going to show you exactly how they do it and what they're hiding. Brian Friedman has released all these messages and a whole website full of screenshots, but I want to go back to the source. Let's go back to where it all started and dissect the crime scene, if you will. Okay. We're going to figure out how, I mean, the New York Times wouldn't just lie, would they? No, they're like a huge media publication. They can't just lie to you. No, that's what I thought. I was very naive. And just know that I've been there. I've been duped by the New York Times before as well. I thought they were this big, prestigious organization that wouldn't just lie about somebody. I mean, that's crazy, right? I think a lot of people think that if the New York Times exposes you for doing something, you must have done something bad and you deserve it. But I'm going to call it out, because we are going to go back to the crime scene, because oftentimes the New York Times, they get away scot-free. Nobody really stops reading the New York Times. They don't become any less prestigious. And there's something very wrong with that. And I think y'all should be scared, because if it can happen to the likes of me, it can happen to the likes of you too. And the scary part is that most of us don't have a way to fight back. Right now, Justin Baldoni has this billionaire backer, Steve Sarowitz. Shout out to Steve Sarowitz, because if it wasn't for Steve Sarowitz, you guys wouldn't know the story. You guys wouldn't know Brian Friedman. You wouldn't know any of the text messages. You wouldn't know anything. You would just know that Justin Baldoni is a creep and you shouldn't like him, right? Listen, at the end of the day, nobody's perfect, but I don't know. I think we all realize that there was more to the story. The New York Times article, it's called "We Can Bury Anyone Inside a Hollywood Smear Machine" by Megan Twohey, Mike McIntyre, and Julie Tate. This sets the stage for an alleged campaign to tarnish Blake Lively's reputation after her misconduct allegations against Justin Baldoni. Last summer, as the release of It Ends With Us approached, Justin Baldoni, the director and a star of the film, and Jamie Heath, the lead producer, hired crisis public relations experts during the shooting. Blake Lively, the co-star, had complained that the men had repeatedly violated physical boundaries and made sexual and other inappropriate comments to her. Their studio, Wayfair, agreed to provide a full-time intimacy coordinator, bring in an outside producer, and put other safeguards on set. In a side letter to Miss Lively's contract signed by Mr. Heath, the studio also agreed not to retaliate against the actress. The New York Times' favorite trick is implication over information. This one is a classic. The New York Times doesn't have to outright say Baldoni and Heath are guilty. They just have to imply it. And they do it masterfully in a few sentences. Last summer, as the release of It Ends With Us approached, Justin Baldoni and director, star of the film Jamie Heath, lead producer, hired a crisis public relations expert. First trick, drop crisis PR in the first sentence to make them look shady right from the jump. What they don't tell you is that every major studio and public figure pretty much hires crisis PR in Hollywood, especially if they're dealing with any type of potential litigation or anything where you're like, hey, my spidey senses tell me that something might go down. Like, let's prepare for this. And that's not a gotcha moment. That's called having a career in Hollywood. But the New York Times frames it like Baldoni and Heath were panicking over some bombshell allegations. Then we get this. During the shooting, Blake Lively, the co-star, had complained that the men had repeatedly violated physical boundaries and made sexual and other inappropriate comments to her. Okay. Notice anything? No specifics. What boundaries? What comments? They don't say. There's no proof. They don't cite receipts. Just that Lively said it happened. Okay, she complained. No nuance. Baldoni and Heath's side? Oh, don't worry about all that. And this is the part that kills me. Their studio, Wayfarer, agreed to provide a full-time intimacy coordinator, bring in an outside producer, and put other safeguards on set. You see how slick that is? If you're just a regular person reading this at home, your brain automatically assumes that Baldoni and co. were forced to make these changes because of inappropriate behavior. But that's not necessarily true. What they don't tell you is that intimacy quarters, they're completely standard in Hollywood. Baldoni already had one from the start. These safeguards were not just some punishment. They were business as usual. But they leave all of that out. You see how they framed it? They make it seem like the intimacy coordinator was hired after the complaints were made. Because they know the average person reading this does not work in Hollywood. So they let the reader assume the worst. And that's the dirty trick. They don't have to prove anything. They just have to suggest it and let the public run wild. And the best part, if Baldoni sues them over this paragraph, they can just turn around and say, we never said he did anything. We just said that Lively complained about it. You get it? This is how the media plays this game. So let's get to the next paragraph. But by August, the two men who had positioned themselves as feminist allies in the Me Too era expressed fears that her allegations would become public and taint them, according to a legal complaint that she filed. According to the legal complaint. You see that? Not according to the New York Times. According to the complaint that she filed on Friday, right? Like, oh yeah, we just got our hands on it. No, they were, who knows? If I had to guess, they were coordinating with Lively's team far before the article dropped, even before the metadata evidence that has come out, I would guess. It claims that their PR effort had an explicit goal. This is Lively's complaint. This is what New York Times is saying. It claims that their PR effort had an explicit goal to harm Miss Lively's reputation instead. Oh, this is a classic New York Times move. Set up a contradiction that doesn't actually exist and let the audience fill in the blanks with suspicion. They don't have to outright say Baldoni is a fraud or Ariadna is a liar. They just have to imply it and let the court of public opinion do the rest. So let's break that down. New York Times says Baldoni and Heath branded themselves as feminist allies, but then gasp, they were worried about being accused of misconduct. What's the implication here? That if you publicly support women, you shouldn't fear false allegations? That if you believe in #MeToo, you must be guilty if someone accuses you? That's insane. You can believe in protecting women and also not want your entire career torched by a baseless article, right? Both things can be true. But New York Times doesn't want you to think critically. They just want you to eat it all up, whatever they're dishing out. They want to plant the idea that Baldoni was performatively feminist until it didn't serve him. And that's exactly how they framed Me Too. Speaking of Me Too, hashtag Me Too. By the way, you guys like my new sweatshirt? These are available on the website. Anyway, this is exactly how they framed me. They painted me as someone who claimed to want to help young creators. But then, there were claims that I was a bad manager. That's it. That's the whole setup. They didn't prove anything. They just made it sound like my entire mission was suspect, just like they're doing with Baldoni. Now let's compare their playbook side by side. On Baldoni, he presented himself as a feminist ally, but was afraid of false allegations. Suspicious. On Me, she said she wanted to help young creators, but some creators claimed she was exploitative. Suspicious. You see how they do it? They take whatever you stand for and make it sound like a convenient cover for whatever their anonymous sources say you did. And the best part, they never have to prove a thing. They just set the stage so you look like a hypocrite. Now let's talk about the real contradiction here. New York Times paints Baldoni's concerns about false allegations as some kind of secret admission of guilt. But last I checked, the New York Times literally has an entire department dedicated to avoiding defamation lawsuits. By their own logic, if Baldoni was guilty for protecting himself, then what does that say about the New York Times covering its own ass every time they write a hit piece? The truth is that when you go up against a machine like the New York Times, they don't just challenge your side of the story, they challenge your right to have a side at all. And they do it in a way that makes sure the public will never give you the benefit of the doubt. Because in their world, the accused is always guilty. We're on to this playbook now, and we're not buying it.